Welcome to the MadHuman channel. Tonight, we step into the shadows of time, into a period where every fact seems familiar, yet every truth feels impossible. Tonight, we explore the century of human history that no one can explain. Not because records are lost, not because archives vanished in fire or flood, but because the events themselves defy logic, reason, and expectation. This is a century that flickers in the margins of memory, a period of contradictions, impossibilities, and eerie patterns that hint at forces unseen, decisions unaccountable, and consequences still unfolding. It begins quietly in the everyday lives of ordinary people. Streets filled with commerce, children learning to write, fires burning in hearths. Yet beneath the surface, a rhythm moves unseen, a rhythm that will shape nations, erode certainty, and rewrite what we think we know about cause and effect. Ordinary events take on extraordinary patterns. Leaders act in ways that history cannot rationalize. Economies collapse and rise without precedent. Inventions appear decades ahead of their time, then vanish without trace. Wars are fought not for territory, not for ideology, but for reasons that remain cryptic even to those who recorded them. And the more we study this century, the more the lines blur. Technology accelerates inexplicably. Populations shift without reason. Disasters strike in patterns that mathematics cannot predict. People report phenomena that logic cannot contain, yet leave records detailed enough to haunt historians, anthropologists, and the curious alike. Entire movements surge across continents with no discernible origin. Knowledge appears, spreads, and sometimes disappears, leaving only fragments, echoes, and questions that have no answers. The psychological weight of this century is staggering. How can 100 years, fully documented, appear simultaneously coherent and incomprehensible? How can human behavior, guided by reason and observation, produce patterns that defy every law of probability? Those who lived through it recorded events faithfully, yet when historians attempt to assemble the puzzle, the pieces resist fitting together. It is as though some invisible hand nudged history, guiding, distorting, and rewriting the story while leaving just enough evidence to unsettle anyone who looks too closely. And in these anomalies, there lies a deeper tension, the haunting sense that history is alive, that the century itself, like a sentient entity, watches and tests the human capacity to understand. Every coincidence is too precise. Every upheaval is too structured. Every disappearance is too deliberate. It is a time when cause and effect fracture, when intention and outcome diverge, and when the familiar becomes unrecognizable. Those who study this century find themselves drawn into a labyrinth with no exit, where each answer produces more questions, and certainty is always just beyond reach. And perhaps the most unsettling part, we can trace echoes of that century into our present. Shadows of its impossible events ripple into modern life. Inventions we cannot explain, decisions we cannot rationalize, patterns we cannot predict. They all seem to descend from that 100-year span, like a ghost pressing forward, shaping the world without revealing its face. To understand this century is to confront the limits of reason, memory, and human comprehension itself. This is the century no one can explain, the century that defies historians, mathematicians, and psychologists alike. The century where human agency appears real yet insufficient, where patterns exist yet make no sense, where the past whispers secrets that cannot be fully heard. And tonight, we begin our journey into that impossible 100 years, into a story that will challenge what you think you know about time, history, and the fragile construct we call reality. As we move deeper into this century, the anomalies become impossible to ignore. Ordinary records, census data, financial ledgers, newspapers begin to contradict themselves. Entire towns report events that never appear on official maps. Letters describe inventions and discoveries decades before anyone else seems to have conceived them. And yet, when modern researchers examine the physical evidence, artifacts, patents, prototypes, they find fragments that match the descriptions, but only partially, as if reality itself had skipped steps. Something in this century refuses linear logic. Leaders rise and fall under circumstances that defy analysis. Nations enact policies that seem rational in the moment, only for their consequences to spiral unpredictably, creating outcomes no historian could foresee. Wars ignite without clear causes. Alliances shift in patterns too precise to be random. Entire social movements blossom with no apparent origin, their leaders sometimes vanishing without explanation, leaving behind texts, speeches, or manifestos that influence generations long after their disappearance. It is as if human agency itself becomes a variable in a system that no one can understand, a system where intention is insufficient to predict outcome. Even in daily life, the strange logic of this century asserts itself. People report sudden flashes of knowledge, intuitions about events before they occur, skills appearing without training, memories of places never visited. Diaries speak of inventions anticipated, disasters foreseen, and decisions made based on visions no one else shares. These accounts are consistent across geography and social class, as though some force we cannot measure subtly nudged every human mind in parallel. The more you study it, the more it feels like the century itself was orchestrating human behavior, guiding history with invisible hands, and leaving traces just enough to make the pattern detectable but never explainable. And the technology, it terrifies and fascinates historians alike. Machines appear in sketches or journals decades before they are known to have been invented, yet some disappear without a trace, leaving no prototypes or patents. Scientists describe principles they cannot yet formalize, only for those principles to become common knowledge in later decades. Entire industries emerge seemingly overnight, driven by knowledge no one can trace to an origin. It is as if information itself leaked forward through time, appearing in the hands of those who were ready for it, and yet withheld from others, creating a century filled with progress that makes no linear sense. Psychologically, the century exerts a weight that is difficult to describe. Scholars, when piecing together the events, often feel a creeping unease, a sense that the past is not passive, that history is alive in a subtle, intelligent way, guiding, testing, and revealing itself in fragments. Every attempt to reconcile records creates new contradictions. Every rational explanation is undermined by one more anomaly. Ordinary logic collapses, leaving only pattern, chaos, and a persistent sense that the human mind is ill-equipped to grasp the mechanisms behind what unfolded. And the disappearances, countless disappearances, are perhaps the most haunting aspect. Entire families vanish from town records, leaving homes and possessions untouched. Leaders, scientists, and artists disappear mid-project, leaving behind works incomplete, ideas unfinished, legacies suspended in ambiguity. Those who vanish are sometimes reported elsewhere, in distant lands, describing knowledge they should not have had, yet always under circumstances that make verification impossible. It is as though the century itself pulled people along invisible threads, nudging history forward, orchestrating events in ways no human could predict or explain. And yet, the century is not entirely malevolent. Strange acts of creativity, sudden leaps in understanding, and moments of profound insight punctuate the chaos. Inventions, discoveries, and social reforms appear with no discernible origin, yet transform societies irrevocably. Entire cultural movements, literature, music, philosophy, bloom in ways that feel prescient, as if some unseen hand gently shaped the collective consciousness. The century seems both to challenge and elevate humanity, presenting impossible puzzles, shaping lives, and leaving patterns that no one can fully decode. The psychological effect of this century is cumulative, a subtle, almost subliminal unease that creeps across generations. Scholars, archivists, and historians report recurring dreams, flashes of déjà vu, and inexplicable intuitions about events long past. The evidence is everywhere, yet nothing fits comfortably. Each revelation deepens the mystery, each anomaly multiplies the questions. It is a century where cause and effect fracture, where time appears elastic, and where history itself seems to pulse with awareness. And perhaps the most disturbing thought of all, echoes of this century continue into the present. Patterns repeat, knowledge resurfaces in unexpected ways, and behaviors recur with eerie precision. The century no one can explain leaves behind not just records, but a resonance, a rhythm in human events, thought, and culture that suggests the anomalies were never confined to the past. In its unexplainable patterns, it reminds us that history is not merely recorded. It is lived, interpreted, and perhaps subtly guided by forces beyond comprehension. As the century unfolds, the anomalies grow more pronounced. Entire cities report phenomena that defy natural law. Lights appear in the sky with no astronomical explanation. Sudden shifts in climate occur over weeks, regions freezing or burning without meteorological precedent. Crops grow or fail inexplicably, sometimes yielding harvests decades ahead of what would be scientifically possible, sometimes collapsing as if the soil itself rejected cultivation. People speak of events in hushed tones, gatherings, movements, and catastrophes that leave no logical trace, yet leave communities forever changed. Strange coincidences, repeated across continents, suggest a pattern that is both terrifying and meticulous. Leaders in different nations make identical decisions simultaneously, decisions that alter economies, populations, and geopolitical landscapes. Entire social movements erupt in perfect synchrony, miles apart, with no contact or common origin. Cultural trends, inventions, and philosophies appear as if some invisible force has drafted a script that humanity is compelled to perform. A script with no author, no explanation, and no end in sight. And the psychological toll is undeniable. Those who live through the century experience a constant tension between familiarity and alienation. Daily life feels real, tangible, and yet subtly off-kilter. Diaries, letters, and personal accounts contain entries describing moments where time seems to distort, where memory and reality diverge. People recall events that never happened, predict outcomes that defy probability, and experience visions of places and inventions that should not exist. It is a century that stretches the human mind beyond its natural limits, challenging logic, reason, and perception itself. Even the scientific record is fractured. Experiments produce results that contradict established laws, then later yield outcomes consistent with principles not yet discovered. Instruments register phenomena that cannot be explained, only to record silence when observed again. In some laboratories, researchers claim to have glimpsed inventions decades ahead of their era, only for the designs to vanish without replication. Knowledge itself seems fluid, ephemeral, and occasionally anticipatory, as if the century has its own agenda, selectively revealing truths, then withdrawing them, leaving humanity suspended between insight and confusion. Religious, philosophical, and artistic movements all bear the imprint of this strange century. Entire ideologies emerge, capturing the collective consciousness, only to vanish or transform without clear cause. Texts appear predicting events centuries in advance, often cryptically, yet later proved astonishingly accurate. Music, literature, and visual arts express visions of technology, societal upheaval, and cultural trends decades before they are widely known. The boundary between inspiration, foresight, and impossibility dissolves. This century does not merely challenge historians. It challenges the very nature of cause, effect, and understanding. Disappearances continue to haunt the narrative. Individuals vanish at pivotal moments, scientists mid-discovery, artists mid-creation, leaders mid-decision. Some reappear, reporting experiences beyond comprehension. Foreign lands untraceable, knowledge impossible for their time, insights into events centuries ahead. Others never return, leaving only cryptic notes, incomplete works, and records that hint at comprehension of forces humanity cannot define. The disappearances themselves form a pattern, precise, inexplicable, and unervingly consistent across decades and continents. And the most unnerving aspect is the sense of intention. Though no actor can be identified, the century seems to guide humanity with deliberate precision. Wars, revolutions, inventions, cultural renaissances, all appear not as random occurrences, but as movements orchestrated by some unseen hand. Yet the hand is never seen, never acknowledged, never explained. The century is both narrative and author, stage and playwright, simultaneously human and inhuman in its execution. By the end of the century, historians and scholars are left with a profound unease. Evidence abounds, yet logic collapses. Patterns persist, yet no mechanism can account for them. Humanity is both actor and observer in a drama whose script was never written in ink, yet enacted with unfailing consistency. And the most chilling realization: the echoes of this century ripple into the present, subtly guiding thought, behavior, and culture, suggesting that the unexplainable century is not confined to history. It is ongoing, a force threading through time, shaping human destiny without acknowledgement, explanation, or reason. Within this century, certain events defy all rational reconstruction. Entire cities report technological advancements decades ahead of their time. Bridges, engines, and machines described in diaries, sketches, and patents appear long before the principles behind them were understood. Some of these technologies vanish mysteriously. Blueprints disappear, prototypes crumble into unusable fragments, and inventors themselves vanish or fall silent. Communities report that certain devices simply fail without cause, as if reality itself rejects their existence until some future era renders them possible. At the same time, the cultural phenomena are equally confounding. Entire artistic movements emerge almost simultaneously across continents with no discernible connection between creators. Music compositions, architectural designs, and literary styles appear as if inspired by a singular, invisible source, yet none of the artists knew one another. Philosophical treatises appear predicting global crises, social revolutions, and political upheavals decades before they happen, their authors unable to explain the source of their knowledge. Scholars debate endlessly. Prophecy? Coincidence? or some pattern of history bending beneath unseen laws. Religious and spiritual movements intensify the mystery. In multiple regions, belief systems arise independently, yet echo the same symbolic language, ethical concepts, and esoteric knowledge. Pilgrimages, rituals, and ceremonies coincide across distant lands, often responding to events that, according to conventional history, have not yet occurred. Entire communities recount visions of distant events, wars, natural disasters, societal shifts, that leave them unsettled and compelled to act in ways that preemptively shape outcomes, as if the century itself is orchestrating human behavior on a scale that no individual or collective fully grasps. Disasters of every kind, floods, fires, storms, follow patterns too precise to be chance. Crops fail or flourish in sequences that defy meteorology. Epidemics strike populations following almost ritualistic timing, sometimes sparing entire regions without explanation, other times devastating areas untouched by prior conditions. Wars erupt with seemingly no causal logic, yet outcomes consistently realign nations, economies, and social structures along trajectories that retrospectively appear deliberate. Every catastrophe leaves traces, fragments of explanation, yet the overall narrative resists understanding. Even the individuals of this century behave as if guided by invisible forces. Leaders, inventors, explorers, and ordinary citizens alike make decisions that seem impossibly prescient, sometimes avoiding disasters they could not have predicted, sometimes creating solutions decades ahead of any rational understanding. Diaries reveal dreams that describe future inventions or social revolutions. Letters recount experiences of knowing events before they occur. Psychologists studying the period note an unbroken thread of heightened intuition, unexplained genius, and synchrony across individuals separated by geography and social context. And then there are the vanishings, not just of people but of entire works, knowledge, and artifacts. Libraries contain references to texts that cannot be found. Entire cities are reported in official documents, then disappear from maps and population records. In some cases, communities vanish from historical records entirely, their existence hinted at only by fragments and anecdotal accounts. When scholars attempt to trace these disappearances, timelines fragment, contradictions emerge, and the century's pattern grows ever more elusive. It is as if reality itself refuses coherence, reshaping the past even as it unfolds. The psychological weight of this century is profound. Those who study it feel a constant tension between awe and unease. Evidence exists, yet the logic of it cannot be reconstructed. Cause and effect fracture, yet patterns persist. Observers sense design, intention, and coherence, yet no author, architect, or guiding force can be identified. The century challenges the limits of human comprehension, leaving historians, scientists, and philosophers perpetually unsettled. In the end, the very act of studying this century, piecing together events, tracing anomalies, interpreting fragments, becomes a mirror reflecting the fragility, unpredictability, and mystery inherent in all of human existence. And perhaps the most disquieting thought, the echoes of this century reach forward into our present. Patterns repeat subtly, innovations reappear, social movements mirror anomalies long past. It is as if the century itself is not confined to history, but continues to exert influence. A hidden rhythm threading through time, guiding human thought, behavior, and creation in ways we cannot fully perceive or explain. The century that no one can explain is not just past. It is a presence, a force, and a reminder that reality may be far stranger and less controllable than our minds can comprehend. As the century approaches its final decades, the anomalies escalate into patterns that are impossible to rationalize. Entire populations report experiences of events repeating, almost like echoes across time. People speak of déjà vu that extends beyond individual memory. Entire communities feeling that history is replaying itself, that events they lived through have occurred before in some inaccessible timeline. Governments, scholars, and observers attempt to rationalize these occurrences. Yet no model, no calculation, no framework can contain them. It is as though time itself becomes elastic, folding, stretching, and overlapping in ways that defy logic. Technological phenomena grow more pronounced and inexplicable. Inventions emerge, fully operational, years before anyone possesses the knowledge or materials to create them. Yet just as often, these devices vanish, prototypes dissolve, patents disappear, and inventors themselves vanish or fall silent. Observers note that the creations are often out of sync with the century's known scientific principles, operating on forces or techniques that will not be rediscovered for decades. The century seems to be teasing humanity, revealing knowledge too early, then withdrawing it, as if history itself is an enigmatic teacher, testing patience, comprehension, and perception. Cultural movements reach dizzying complexity in these decades. Art, music, and literature exhibit knowledge of future trends and events with uncanny accuracy. Entire societies experience philosophical renaissances, new moral frameworks, and radical social theories that anticipate revolutions decades before they occur. Simultaneously, religious and spiritual movements multiply across continents, each echoing concepts that appear mysteriously synchronized. Pilgrimages, rituals, and sacred practices coincide with disasters, social upheavals, and technological breakthroughs, as if the spiritual and temporal dimensions of the century are intertwined in ways invisible yet undeniable. Political anomalies multiply. Leaders enact policies that defy conventional reasoning, yet produce results with precision that historians can only describe as impossible. Alliances form and collapse with inexplicable timing. Wars ignite not from ideology or territorial ambition, but seemingly in response to patterns no one can define. And in these conflicts, victories and defeats often follow trajectories that suggest some guiding intelligence behind the apparent chaos. Entire civilizations rise or fall within months, leaving only cryptic records and puzzling inconsistencies for those attempting to reconstruct the events later. And then, there are the disappearances, both literal and metaphorical. Prominent figures vanish from society at crucial moments, leaving behind partial discoveries, unfinished works, and legacies suspended in ambiguity. Entire communities sometimes vanish from historical record, leaving maps, census data, and local accounts riddled with contradictions. Scholars attempting to trace these events encounter walls of inconsistency. Records erased, archives missing, evidence contradicting itself. It is as if reality itself resists being comprehended, as though the century has a will, subtle, omnipresent, and utterly elusive. In these final decades, the psychological weight of the century becomes almost unbearable. Those who study it report compulsions to observe, document, and analyze, and yet, every effort to explain or rationalize only deepens the mystery. Patterns emerge, yet explanations evaporate. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes of what might have been. Observers feel as though they are participating in an experiment they cannot understand, with history itself as both subject and observer, shaping outcomes while remaining beyond comprehension. And perhaps the most haunting aspect This century's influence continues beyond its chronological boundaries. Its strange anomalies, technological foresight, synchronized social movements, inexplicable events, appear in subtle ways long after its official conclusion. Inventions resurface, cultural movements recur, social revolutions echo its patterns. The century that no one can explain seems less a period in history than a force, a rhythm threading through time, a subtle current guiding human thought, behavior, and destiny. In the end, the final decades do not offer resolution. They intensify the mystery, leaving scholars, historians, and observers suspended in awe and unease. Every anomaly, every disappearance, every impossible event contributes to a sense that the century itself is alive, not in flesh or bone, but in pattern, resonance, and influence. Time is not linear here. Cause does not lead inexorably to effect. And history, when fully observed, is not a record but a living, breathing enigma that challenges everything humanity believes about itself, about order, and about the universe. By now, the patterns of the century are undeniable, yet remain indecipherable. Entire networks of events, political, technological, cultural, and personal, appear intertwined in ways that no historian, statistician, or psychologist can fully untangle. Consider the inventions that appeared decades early, then disappeared only to reemerge precisely when humanity was capable of understanding them. Consider social movements that ignited simultaneously across continents, reshaping societies without a clear origin. Consider disasters, perfectly timed and localized, that seem to respond to events in other regions, as if the century itself were orchestrating a global symphony of cause and effect beyond comprehension. Within families, diaries reveal uncanny knowledge. Children are born with skills or understanding far beyond their age, yet these gifts vanish as mysteriously as they arrived. Entire communities recount visions of distant wars, climate events, or scientific breakthroughs, describing them in extraordinary detail before they actually occur. Scholars have attempted to categorize these occurrences, to frame them as coincidence, emergent behavior, or mass delusion, yet no theory fully withstands scrutiny. The century resists being explained. It is a riddle written into the very flow of human events, with no Rosetta Stone, no cipher, and no authoritative key. Even economic systems bear the fingerprints of this century's unexplainable logic. Markets collapse and rebound in ways that defy precedent, yet often in perfect alignment with social, technological, or environmental anomalies. Entire industries emerge or vanish with no discernible cause, and attempts to trace the causal links collapse into contradiction. Wealth and poverty shift across populations in ways too precise to be random, yet entirely incompatible with known mechanisms. It is as if the invisible hand guiding the century operates beyond human comprehension, leaving observable outcomes without discernible origins. The arts provide no refuge from this disquiet. Music, literature, painting, and sculpture reflect visions far ahead of their time. Artists, unknowingly, anticipate future social movements, technological innovations, and global conflicts. Entire literary genres and musical styles appear decades before the historical context to support them exists. Scholars struggle to separate foresight from coincidence, inspiration from impossibility. Every work of art, every composition, every novel becomes a puzzle piece in a mosaic that refuses to align, yet hints at a greater, unseen coherence. And the disappearances continue to haunt the narrative. Key figures vanish at crucial moments. Inventors before their discoveries, thinkers before their revelations, leaders before decisive moments in history. Some reappear, claiming knowledge of events decades ahead, yet provide no verifiable evidence. Others never return, leaving only tantalizing traces in letters, diaries, and incomplete works. Entire communities sometimes vanish from records entirely, leaving behind inconsistent documents, empty homes, and witnesses whose testimonies contradict one another. The century itself seems to assert a will, orchestrating human actions and disappearances in a pattern visible only in hindsight, a pattern that defies all explanation. Even the natural world participates in these anomalies. Climate fluctuations occur unpredictably and with precision. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions strike without geophysical cause, and ecosystems shift in ways that defy established ecological understanding. Crops flourish or fail in perfect sequences that confound agriculture experts. Species appear or disappear in correlation with human events, creating patterns too precise to be coincidence. It is as if the very earth, responding to forces beyond human perception, is a participant in the century's impossible narrative, a living system synchronized with events that no human mind can fully comprehend. The psychological impact on those who lived through the century is profound. Individuals report experiences that defy explanation. Visions of future inventions, intuitions about global events, dreams of places never visited. Historians examining this period often describe a creeping unease, a subtle disorientation, a feeling that reality itself was bending around them. Each anomaly, each disappearance, each pattern, leaves the mind unsettled, challenging assumptions about time, causality, and the human capacity to understand the forces shaping existence. Perhaps the most unnerving truth of this century is its persistence. Its anomalies do not vanish with time. Instead, echoes reverberate across decades, influencing decisions, inventions, social movements, and cultural shifts. Patterns established in the century reappear in modern events, as if the century's influence extends far beyond its chronological bounds. The unexplainable century is not merely history. It is an ongoing current, a hidden rhythm threading through human experience, subtly guiding thought, action, and creativity in ways we can observe, but never fully explain. As the century progresses toward its final years, the scale of anomalies expands. Entire social systems behave unpredictably, yet follow patterns that, once mapped in hindsight, appear almost deliberate. Populations migrate in ways unconnected to climate, resources, or conflict. Entire cities depopulate or flourish with uncanny precision. Entire governments collapse or stabilize under circumstances that defy conventional analysis. Political, social, and technological changes accelerate simultaneously across continents, often without clear communication, as if guided by some invisible, omnipresent influence. At the individual level, human behavior mirrors these broader patterns. Children display knowledge and abilities far beyond their expected development. Adults make decisions with an intuitive clarity that defies reason. Dreams, visions, and flashes of insight guide actions with unerring precision, yet the origin of this knowledge remains inexplicable. Personal accounts repeatedly describe events before they happen. Natural disasters, political shifts, and technological breakthroughs, documented in diaries and letters with timestamps that confirm authenticity. The century becomes a theater of impossible foresight, and those living within it act both consciously and under a strange, collective influence that no one can define. Technological developments further strain understanding. Entire fields of knowledge emerge decades ahead of their time. Engines, communication systems, Energy sources and medical breakthroughs are described in sketches and manuscripts long before the materials or principles are available to realize them. Some inventions vanish, only to reappear precisely when humanity has reached the technological capability to sustain them. Scientists, inventors, and engineers struggle with fragments of insight that seem to come from a future they cannot yet access. The century itself behaves as a teacher, revealing, concealing, accelerating knowledge, while remaining impervious to explanation. Cultural and artistic phenomena mirror this technological strangeness. Movements in music, literature, and visual arts appear simultaneously in regions separated by oceans, social class, and language. Entire aesthetic styles emerge with themes, forms, and philosophies that will only be understood decades later. Artists report inspiration drawn from visions of the future, from places they have never visited, and from events that have not yet occurred. Literary texts describe technologies, societies, and conflicts before historical context could account for them. The century cultivates creativity, yet does so in a pattern that is both deliberate and impossible to decode. And then there are the disappearances. Individuals, communities, and entire streams of knowledge vanish with an eerie regularity. Inventors, thinkers, and leaders disappear at crucial points, leaving incomplete projects and unfinished ideas. Whole communities fade from records without explanation, leaving traces only in fragmentary accounts and oral traditions. When these anomalies are examined, historians encounter contradictions, missing documents, and irreconcilable timelines. Reality itself seems to shift around these absences, as if the century protects, edits, or even erases aspects of history to maintain its unexplainable integrity. Even nature appears influenced by the century's strange logic. Environmental phenomena, storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, sudden climate shifts, follow patterns too precise to be coincidental. Crops fail or thrive with inexplicable timing. Animal populations behave in ways that correlate with human events in ways unaccounted for by biology. Rivers rise and fall, winds shift, and seasons behave inconsistently, as if the natural world is subtly responding to the invisible hand guiding human history. The universe itself seems complicit in maintaining the century's incomprehensible pattern. The psychological effect of living through or studying this century is profound. Scholars report an unsettling sense that history is alive, intelligent, and observing human behavior. Patterns exist, yet no mechanism explains them. Cause and effect appear fractured, yet the outcomes reveal an uncanny coherence. To attempt understanding is to encounter paradox after paradox, uncertainty after uncertainty. Individuals studying this century feel drawn into a web of cognition, perception, and intuition that tests the limits of human comprehension. The century is simultaneously familiar and alien, ordered and chaotic, comprehensible and ineffable, and the echoes extend beyond the century itself. Technological, social, and cultural patterns reverberate into subsequent decades, influencing behavior, invention, and thought. Knowledge suppressed or lost during the century reemerges at precise moments. Social movements recur, scientific discoveries resurface, and art continues to reflect visions first glimpsed in this impossible century. Its influence is ongoing, threading through human history like a hidden pulse, a force shaping thought, behavior, and culture, yet remaining imperceptible to ordinary perception. As the century reaches its final chapters, the anomalies intensify to a degree that defies comprehension. Entire cities experience simultaneous phenomena that are impossible to reconcile. Unexplained lights, sudden shifts in weather, sudden technological surges, and synchronized social movements that span continents. Scholars attempting to map these occurrences find themselves trapped in contradictions, evidence that confirms and denies itself simultaneously. Events repeat, overlap, and echo as though the century has its own rhythm, its own intelligence, guiding human behavior and natural processes alike. Disappearances, both individual and collective, become more frequent and disturbing. Influential thinkers vanish mid-research, leaving projects incomplete but leaving behind notes predicting future events with unerring precision. Entire populations are displaced or vanish from official records, only to be referenced later in historical documents as if they had never left. Witnesses who survive report visions of distant lands, knowledge of inventions not yet realized, and insights into conflicts and movements that historians can only verify retrospectively. The century seems to move humanity as pieces on a chessboard, with each disappearance, each action, calculated, deliberate, and yet imperceptible to those living it. Technological anomalies surge with intensity. Machines are described and even partially constructed long before the principles to support them are understood. Entire methods of communication, energy production, and transportation appear in fragmented sketches and journals, vanishing almost immediately, only to reappear decades later precisely when humanity can comprehend and use them. Scientists, engineers, and inventors frequently encounter concepts too advanced for their era, only for these concepts to dissolve as quickly as they appeared. Knowledge itself seems fluid, intermittent, and anticipatory, as if the century itself were selectively distributing insights to humanity. Cultural and artistic phenomena mirror this unexplainable pattern. Music, literature, and visual arts achieve levels of foresight so precise it borders on prescience. Movements emerge simultaneously in distant lands, reflecting philosophies, aesthetics, and knowledge that seem impossible for isolated creators to achieve. Literary works describe inventions, conflicts, and social transformations before the historical context exists for them to be understood. Artists, writers, and thinkers repeatedly claim inspiration from visions or dreams of events they cannot explain, as if the century itself whispers ideas into human consciousness. Political and social systems are equally confounding. Governments collapse or stabilize with inexplicable timing. Wars erupt and resolve in patterns too precise to be accidental. Alliances form and dissolve across nations in ways that defy traditional cause and effect reasoning. Entire revolutions appear spontaneous, yet outcomes align perfectly with global shifts in technology, culture, and human behavior. The century seems to operate on multiple layers of causality simultaneously, creating outcomes that are coherent only when observed as a complete, interconnected system. Yet even the most comprehensive analysis fails to fully explain it. Even the natural world participates in the century's enigma. Climate anomalies, floods, droughts, sudden temperature shifts, occur with a precision that defies meteorological understanding. Crops flourish or fail in ways that ignore soil, weather, or human intervention. Animal populations behave in ways that suggest an unseen coordination with human events, and natural disasters unfold along patterns that mirror social and political shifts. It is as if the environment itself is subtly guided by the same invisible hand orchestrating the century's impossible events. The psychological weight of this period becomes almost unbearable for those who study it. Historians, scientists, and philosophers experience unease, confusion, and awe in equal measure. Patterns exist yet defy cause. Disappearances occur with precision yet resist explanation. Knowledge appears, vanishes, and reappears in a cycle that tests comprehension. Those who attempt to rationalize the century often feel trapped in a loop of insight and contradiction, perceiving its coherence only in fragments, yet never grasping the full orchestration behind it. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all, this century does not remain confined to its own time. Its anomalies reverberate into subsequent decades, influencing inventions, social movements, and cultural trends in ways that are subtle, persistent, and often imperceptible. Knowledge lost, suppressed, or obscured during the century reemerges exactly when it can be understood and applied. Social upheavals recur in patterns first established decades earlier. Art, literature, and philosophy echo ideas born in this century. Its influence continues, threading through time like a hidden pulse, guiding humanity subtly, persistently, and invisibly. As the century draws closer to its enigmatic close, the intensity of the unexplainable events reaches an almost unbearable crescendo. Entire regions report sequences of occurrences that cannot be reconciled with conventional history or science. Meteor showers that precede disasters by days, inexplicable shifts in magnetic fields, sudden and simultaneous awakenings of innovations across continents. People begin to sense a rhythm underlying reality itself, subtle yet undeniable, as if time is not merely passing but being guided, orchestrated, and layered by an intelligence beyond comprehension. Disappearances evolve from the isolated to the systemic. Entire districts, sometimes entire towns, are reported missing from records, as though erased by some selective process. Individuals who vanish often leave behind evidence of knowledge or insight that no human should possess. Calculations predicting scientific advancements decades ahead, maps of territories unknown, or detailed accounts of wars that have yet to unfold. Others reappear, claiming experiences in places that defy geography, time, and even memory, describing a coherence and order in chaos that ordinary perception cannot grasp. Humanity becomes both actor and audience in a drama written by the century itself. Technological phenomena accelerate with paradoxical precision. Entire inventions appear decades prematurely, devices, engines, and communication systems that defy physics as understood at the time. Some vanish inexplicably, leaving only partial sketches, fragmented blueprints, or cryptic notes. Occasionally, a fully functional prototype emerges, only to dissolve or become inaccessible within weeks. Scientists report instances of simultaneous invention, separated by oceans and language, suggesting that knowledge is transmitted not through conventional means, but through some hidden conduit woven into the fabric of time itself. Cultural, artistic, and philosophical movements manifest with eerie synchrony. Entire aesthetic revolutions appear across continents simultaneously, reflecting ideas, techniques, and philosophies that no single society could have generated independently. Literary works describe social, political, and technological events decades before the conditions exist to explain them. Music compositions anticipate instruments not yet invented. Artistic visions depict landscapes, machinery, and societies that will not exist for generations. The century itself seems to plant seeds of inspiration, waiting for humanity to catch up, as if time and creativity are tools under its careful, invisible guidance. Social and political systems exhibit inexplicable behavior. Revolutions ignite simultaneously in separate nations. Governments collapse and stabilize with timing that defies conventional causality. Decisions by leaders, often based on intuition, create outcomes that align perfectly with global patterns of invention, disaster, and social movement. Entire wars appear to follow an invisible choreography. Strikes, treaties, and revolts occur in sequences that create coherence in retrospect but seem random in the moment. Humanity acts both autonomously and under a hidden influence, creating a sense that the century is not merely a period of history but an active participant shaping the world. Natural phenomena mirror the century's anomalies. Catastrophic storms, earthquakes, and sudden climatic shifts occur with almost intentional precision. Crops fail or flourish against all probability. Animal migrations, births, and deaths align mysteriously with human events. Entire ecosystems appear to follow patterns tied to human activity and social transformation, as if the environment itself is a participant in the century's impossible narrative. Mountains, rivers, and forests bear subtle but unmistakable imprints of events that defy explanation, leaving the planet itself as an archive of the unexplainable century. The psychological toll on humanity deepens. Individuals and communities experience simultaneous feelings of awe, fear, and disorientation. People perceive patterns where none should exist, experience knowledge beyond their lifetimes, and feel guided by forces they cannot identify. Scholars, historians, and scientists confront anomalies that challenge the very foundations of causality, logic, and reason. Diaries, letters, and testimonies accumulate, documenting glimpses of events before they occur, but the aggregate record resists any coherent understanding. The century functions simultaneously as narrative, force, and enigma, drawing humanity into its rhythm while leaving explanation perpetually out of reach. Even in the waning years, the century's influence extends beyond its chronological boundaries. Inventions, social movements, and artistic trends first glimpsed within its time continue to reverberate decades later. Knowledge lost or suppressed during the century resurfaces precisely when humanity can comprehend it. Patterns repeat subtly, reminding future generations that the unexplainable century is not bound by the past. It is a force threading through the present and the future, shaping thought, creativity, and human destiny in ways that are imperceptible yet undeniable. As the century reaches its final threshold, reality itself seems to bend. Time folds, overlaps, and fractures. Events that should be separated by years or decades begin to coalesce, appearing simultaneously to witnesses across continents. People report seeing future events reflected in current occurrences: storms, political upheavals, scientific breakthroughs. Yet when they try to act, the outcomes shift, as if the century responds to observation. Cause and effect no longer follow linear rules. Instead, the century behaves like a living organism, breathing through events, experiments, and human action, and responding with a coherence that only becomes visible in hindsight. Disappearances become almost ritualistic. Inventors, thinkers, and leaders vanish precisely when their work reaches critical importance. Entire communities dissolve without trace, leaving only fragmentary records and stories passed orally. In many cases, these vanishings coincide with remarkable achievements or discoveries. A scientist disappears the day before proving a revolutionary theory. An artist is gone the moment their work transcends the understanding of contemporaries. A political leader vanishes just before reshaping the destiny of a nation. It is as if the century itself claims these individuals, not to punish or reward, but to maintain the integrity of its mysterious pattern. Technological anomalies reach a fever pitch. Entire systems of engineering, communication, and energy appear fully conceived decades before humanity is capable of realizing them. Some exist for only days before disappearing, leaving behind only fragments, schematics, partial prototypes, cryptic notes. Others emerge in unexpected forms, unrecognizable yet functional. Attempts to reverse engineer them often fail. Scientists report that these devices operate on principles not yet formulated, as if physics itself were pliable within this century. Knowledge is not linear. It is sporadic, anticipatory, and often fleeting. Humanity chases insight that arrives too early, then slips away, leaving only questions and awe. Cultural phenomena continue their inexplicable synchronicity. Entire aesthetic movements, philosophies, and artistic trends appear independently yet simultaneously across continents. Music anticipates instruments not yet invented. Literature describes revolutions in societies before the historical context exists. Art captures landscapes and machines that will not physically exist for decades. Writers, composers, and visual artists report visions and inspirations they cannot explain. Entire schools of thought appear fully formed, only to vanish or reemerge years later, aligning with societal and technological readiness. The century cultivates creativity, yet on a schedule incomprehensible to ordinary human perception. Social and political systems become entangled in patterns too complex to untangle. Governments collapse or stabilize unpredictably. Wars erupt and resolve with outcomes that make sense only when observed retrospectively. Alliances form and dissolve across continents with no discernible cause. Revolutions, reforms, and uprisings unfold according to patterns invisible at the moment yet coherent across decades. The century itself seems to conduct these movements, guiding human behavior with an invisible hand, orchestrating the interplay between knowledge, society, and power. Humanity becomes simultaneously agent and instrument of its own history. Natural phenomena reinforce the century's enigma. Catastrophic events, earthquakes, floods, storms, droughts, follow patterns inexplicable by conventional science. Ecosystems respond to human and technological events in precise, coordinated ways. Crops fail or thrive without obvious cause. Animals migrate, reproduce, or vanish in alignment with social, technological, and political anomalies. Mountains, rivers, and forests bear subtle markers of these patterns, suggesting that the Earth itself participates in this century's orchestration. Nature and humanity are intertwined in a choreography that defies comprehension. The psychological toll deepens. Individuals living within this century report simultaneous awe, confusion, and existential unease. Dreams, visions, and premonitions provide glimpses of events years before they occur. Scholars, historians, and scientists encounter phenomena that challenge every assumption about causality, logic, and linearity. Attempts to explain these patterns are met with paradox, contradiction, and incompleteness. The century behaves as an entity, simultaneously alive and abstract, guiding and observing, offering fragments of knowledge while concealing the whole. Those who study it feel both participants and pawns in a narrative they cannot fully perceive. Even beyond its temporal boundaries, the century's influence persists. Innovations first glimpsed in the century resurface precisely when humanity can comprehend them. Social and political movements echo its patterns decades later. Art, philosophy, and literature continue to reflect concepts seeded in this era. Its unseen hand threads through history, shaping thought, culture, and human destiny. The century is not merely a chapter in the past. It is a persistent, hidden current, a subtle yet inexorable force that transcends the conventional boundaries of time And within this force lies the greatest mystery, its purpose. There is no discernible intent, yet a pattern emerges, a subtle, coherent rhythm connecting inventions, disappearances, natural events, and human behavior. Individuals feel guided, societies reshaped, and knowledge distributed according to laws no human mind can reconstruct. It is neither benevolent nor malevolent, deliberate nor chaotic. It simply is, the century itself, a living enigma, carrying humanity through an impossible weave of events, knowledge, and experiences that leave only awe, fear, and unending wonder in its wake. As the century advances to its penultimate moments, the scale of the inexplicable stretches beyond individual comprehension. Entire continents experience simultaneous phenomena, technological flashes, social revolutions, natural catastrophes, appearing as if synchronized by an unseen hand. Observers report déjà vu not just in moments but across entire events. Entire cities recalling incidents as if they had occurred before, communities sensing history repeating itself, societies behaving in ways that echo decades-old events with eerie precision. Time, it seems, has become fluid, layered, and almost sentient, bending around the events of humanity as if testing perception itself. Disappearances reach a terrifying rhythm. Leaders, inventors, artists, and scholars vanish at the exact moment their influence would have reached critical mass. Their works, sometimes complete, sometimes fragmented, leave trails of insight that defy era-appropriate understanding. Entire populations quietly evaporate from historical record, leaving gaps filled only by inconsistent eyewitness testimony, fragmented documents, or oral traditions that contradict themselves. These absences do not destabilize the century. Instead, they seem to reinforce its structure, suggesting that the flow of human history is less chaotic than it appears, yet still impossible to fully decode. Technological anomalies continue to accelerate. Entire inventions, energy systems, and communication devices appear decades ahead of human capacity to create them. They function flawlessly, then vanish, leaving behind only tantalizing evidence. Diagrams, cryptic notes, or partially assembled prototypes. Attempts to replicate these inventions fail, often catastrophically. Knowledge arrives intermittently, appearing in scattered fragments, yet aligning perfectly across time to ensure that humanity will eventually catch up. The century appears to act as both teacher and puzzle master, granting insight and removing it, controlling the pace of understanding across generations. Cultural phenomena manifest with increasing synchronicity and strangeness. Entire aesthetic and intellectual movements appear across continents with no discernible communication. Music, literature, and visual art contain knowledge and symbolism far ahead of their time. Composers anticipate instruments yet to exist. Writers describe technologies, societies, and conflicts before the material conditions allow their realization. Philosophers articulate ideas that will only be understood centuries later. It is as if the century itself whispers directly into human creativity, seeding innovation with an intelligence that is intangible but unmistakable. Social and political systems respond with equally inexplicable precision. Governments collapse and stabilize with timing that seems both accidental and intentional. Revolutions erupt in perfect alignment with scientific discoveries or technological shifts, producing outcomes that are coherent only when viewed from decades in the future. Wars unfold in sequences that suggest choreography beyond human comprehension. Leaders act with uncanny intuition, often unaware of the larger patterns they are participating in. Humanity functions both autonomously and as part of a greater orchestration, The century itself seems to be the conductor of a grand, unseen symphony. Nature itself participates in the enigma. Climate fluctuations, floods, droughts, storms, and earthquakes occur with precise, inexplicable timing. Crops thrive or fail in patterns that defy agricultural science. Animal behavior correlates strangely with human social movements, political events, and technological innovations. Mountains, rivers, and forests bear subtle, yet undeniable traces of events that cannot be explained by conventional means. It is as though the earth itself has been synchronized to the century, participating in a narrative that no single observer can fully perceive. The psychological weight becomes unbearable for those immersed in understanding the century. Scholars, historians, and ordinary citizens alike experience a creeping sense of unreality. Dreams, visions, and premonitions provide knowledge of future events, yet acting on this knowledge often alters the outcomes unpredictably. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns that seem to exist with intent but without discernible agency. Human consciousness struggles to grasp the full orchestration, producing a mix of awe, fear, and fascination that permeates every aspect of life. Even beyond the century's official timeline, its influence endures. Innovations, cultural movements, and social patterns reappear decades later, perfectly timed to align with humanity's capacity to understand and apply them. Knowledge lost or suppressed resurfaces precisely when it is needed. Entire philosophical, artistic, and technological movements trace back, unknowingly, to seeds planted during the century. Its invisible hand threads through time, shaping thought, society, and civilization with a persistence that defies comprehension, suggesting that the century is not a period of history but a hidden, continuous force influencing human destiny. And in this culmination lies the most unsettling truth. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is not a force of chaos nor a presiding intelligence in any conventional sense. It is a system, a living enigma that observes, responds, and shapes events across human experience. It distributes knowledge and inspiration selectively, synchronizes human and natural phenomena, and tests perception at every level. It is simultaneously part of history and beyond it, guiding, shaping, and remaining imperceptible, leaving humanity suspended in awe, fear, and perpetual curiosity, unable to fully reconcile the enormity of its influence. As the century approaches its final unfolding, the patterns of anomalies and disappearances escalate beyond comprehension. Entire continents seem to exist in parallel rhythms, events repeating, diverging, and converging in ways that no historian or scientist can chart. People report living the same day twice, witnessing outcomes before they occur, and feeling as though reality itself is layered, as if multiple timelines are bleeding into one another. Dreams, visions, and intuitions align with tangible events in startling precision, creating a sense that the century itself communicates directly with human consciousness, whispering fragments of a truth too immense to grasp. Disappearances evolve into vast, almost ritualistic phenomena. Individuals of extraordinary influence vanish at moments of critical importance. Scientists the day before a breakthrough, political leaders the moment a revolution pivots, artists on the brink of creating works that would reshape culture. Entire towns, sometimes entire populations, disappear from official records, leaving only cryptic traces, incomplete documentation, and conflicting witness accounts. These vanishings do not create chaos. Instead, they reinforce the century's hidden architecture, suggesting a deliberate, incomprehensible order behind the apparent randomness of history. Technological anomalies reach their apex. Devices, energy systems, and communication networks appear decades ahead of human capacity to understand them. Some function fully for days, then vanish without a trace. Others leave only partial sketches, cryptic equations, or vague blueprints. Efforts to replicate these inventions fail repeatedly, often disastrously. Knowledge appears intermittently, arriving in fragments perfectly timed for humanity's eventual comprehension, only to disappear and reappear decades later. The century itself seems to be orchestrating not just events, but the very trajectory of human understanding, guiding evolution, creativity, and technological advancement in ways that elude perception. Cultural and artistic phenomena intensify in their impossible synchronicity. Entire movements emerge independently across continents, anticipating ideas, philosophies, and technologies that do not yet exist. Literature describes social upheavals, inventions, and conflicts decades before they occur. Music anticipates instruments and harmonics that have not been created. Visual arts depict machinery, cities, and landscapes far beyond contemporary understanding. Artists, writers, and thinkers report inspiration from visions or dreams of places they have never visited and events they cannot yet know. Creativity itself seems curated by the century, seeded and timed to influence humanity when it is most ready. Social and political systems behave in patterns too precise to be accidental. Revolutions ignite, governments collapse or stabilize, and wars unfold in sequences that are coherent only when examined decades later. Decisions by leaders, influenced by intuition, dreams, or subtle inspiration, align perfectly with broader historical patterns. Entire societies move in concert, yet the guiding force is invisible, a subtle architecture underlying reality itself. Humanity appears simultaneously free and constrained, autonomous yet choreographed, participating in a narrative too vast and intricate to perceive in its entirety. Natural phenomena mirror this impossibility. Climate anomalies, floods, droughts, storms, and earthquakes occur in patterns that defy conventional science. Crops thrive or fail against all probability. Animal populations align their migrations, births, and deaths with human events in ways that challenge ecological understanding. Mountains, rivers, and forests bear subtle markers of these patterns, as if Earth itself participates in orchestrating the century's unexplainable narrative. Human and natural systems are intertwined, both guided and observed by a force beyond comprehension. The psychological weight reaches a climax. Individuals immersed in the century's events experience awe, disorientation, and existential vertigo. Dreams, visions, and intuitive flashes provide foreknowledge of events that cannot be rationally explained. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns perceptible only in retrospect. Attempting to explain these occurrences produces contradiction, paradox, and incompleteness. Scholars, historians, and ordinary witnesses alike feel simultaneously actors and pawns in a system that observes and responds, distributing knowledge selectively, shaping creativity, and guiding human destiny invisibly. Even beyond the century's temporal boundary, its influence persists with unerring precision. Inventions, discoveries, social movements, and artistic trends planted in this era reemerge at precisely the right moment. Lost knowledge resurfaces exactly when humanity can understand it. Social upheavals and innovations repeat subtly, echoing the patterns first established decades earlier. The century is not merely history. It is an invisible, continuous force threading through time, shaping human thought, behavior, and creativity with precision that remains imperceptible yet undeniable. And within this hidden architecture lies the greatest terror and wonder. The century has no morality, no intention comprehensible to humans. It is neither cruel nor benevolent, neither random nor predictable. It simply moves, orchestrating, distributing, guiding, observing. Humanity lives within it, shaped by it, yet blind to its full scope. Knowledge is delivered selectively. Innovation is timed. Disappearances occur. Events unfold. Nature, society, and thought respond in a grand, invisible choreography. The century is a living enigma, a rhythm of reality itself, leaving awe, fear, and unending fascination in its wake. As the century approaches its ultimate moments, the layers of anomaly become almost unbearable to perceive. Entire regions experience events that overlap, repeat, and diverge simultaneously. Natural disasters unfold while human innovations erupt. Social revolutions occur in parallel with technological breakthroughs. Artistic movements appear independently yet mirror one another across continents. Time itself seems to have folded in upon itself, a palimpsest of reality where the past, present, and future coexist, and where witnessing one event inevitably influences another in ways that defy conventional understanding. Disappearances now occur with terrifying regularity. Individuals essential to scientific breakthroughs, artistic revolutions, and political shifts vanish without warning, leaving fragments of insight or cryptic notes. Entire communities quietly disappear from census records and maps, their histories rewritten as though erased by some hidden hand. Those who remain report sensations of déjà vu across entire cities, dreams that predict the day's events, and fleeting visions of futures they cannot yet influence. Humanity exists within a cycle of creation and erasure, guided by the century's imperceptible architecture. Technological phenomena reach an apex of impossibility. Machines, devices, and systems emerge decades before humanity has the capacity to understand them, sometimes fully functional, sometimes fragmentary. Some vanish immediately. Others appear only long enough to demonstrate principles that defy contemporary science. Attempts to replicate these inventions fail repeatedly, yielding results that further confound understanding. Knowledge arrives selectively and intermittently, as if the century itself controls the flow of insight, shaping the trajectory of human development while remaining impervious to comprehension. Cultural and intellectual manifestations intensify. Entire philosophies, aesthetic movements, and literary schools appear independently across the globe. Music anticipates instruments not yet built. Literature describes social, political, and technological conditions decades before they exist. Art captures landscapes, cities, and machines beyond contemporary reality. Artists, writers, and thinkers describe inspiration from visions or dreams of events and places they have never encountered. Creativity is both nurtured and orchestrated by the century itself, as though human ingenuity is being guided by an invisible, timeless intelligence. Social and political patterns grow increasingly confounding. Governments collapse and stabilize, wars ignite and resolve, revolutions flare and fade, all with timing that seems deliberate yet invisible. Leaders act with intuition beyond explanation. Societies move in unison despite geographical separation. Entire civilizations seem to follow a choreography that only becomes coherent in hindsight. Humanity is both autonomous and subject to a hidden hand, participants in a narrative too vast to comprehend yet impossible to ignore. Nature itself participates in the century's orchestration. Climate anomalies, storms, droughts, floods, and earthquakes occur in patterns inexplicable by contemporary science. Crops flourish or fail counterintuitively. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in alignment with human events. Mountains, rivers, and forests bear subtle but undeniable markers of the century's influence. The planet itself seems to participate in the narrative, a silent witness and co-conspirator in a story that defies linear causality. The psychological tension reaches its zenith. Individuals studying or living through the century experience a disorienting blend of awe, fear, and vertigo. Dreams, premonitions, and flashes of insight reveal future events, yet attempting to act on these visions often shifts outcomes unpredictably. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only fragments, echoes, and patterns perceptible after the fact. Scholars, historians, and ordinary citizens alike feel simultaneously empowered and trapped, participants in a system whose logic is beyond comprehension. Even beyond its temporal boundary, the century exerts influence. Innovations, knowledge, and cultural trends planted within it resurface precisely when humanity can comprehend them. Lost discoveries reappear. Movements recur. Philosophical, artistic, and technological seeds germinate decades or centuries later, aligned perfectly with human readiness. The century is not confined to history. It is a persistent, invisible current threading through time, guiding civilization in imperceptible but undeniable ways. And in this final unraveling, the ultimate truth becomes clear. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent, neither random nor predictable. It is a system, a living enigma, orchestrating, observing, and shaping events across human history. Knowledge is distributed selectively. Innovation is timed. Disappearances occur. Events unfold. Nature, society, and thought respond in a choreography invisible yet tangible. Humanity is simultaneously actor and instrument, awestruck witness and subject. The century exists as a force that cannot be measured, explained, or controlled, a hidden intelligence within history itself. As the century presses on, the events grow not just strange, but incomprehensibly interconnected. Seemingly minor occurrences ripple outward, producing consequences that span continents and decades. A single invention, idea, or social movement in one city triggers a cascade of changes halfway across the world, often in ways that appear orchestrated. Scholars record correlations that defy statistics, noticing patterns in migration, economics, conflict, and art that no known mechanism could produce. Humanity is entangled in the century's invisible lattice, moving according to rules that cannot be deduced, only felt, glimpsed, and documented. Disappearances, now almost ritualistic, become even more profound. Visionaries vanish the instant they cross thresholds of critical insight. Entire urban districts subtly dissolve, leaving maps, documents, and personal accounts out of alignment with reality. Witnesses describe seeing vanished individuals in dreams or fleeting reflections in mirrors, experiencing the sensation that time itself is watching them, folding and unfolding as the century wills. Humanity cannot grasp the scope of the century's selective erasures. Even the most meticulous historians feel trapped in a recursive loop of events, absences, and anomalies. Technological anomalies intensify to an almost mythic level. Entire networks of machines, energy systems, and communications devices materialize decades ahead of human understanding. Some function for days, revealing principles of physics, energy, or computation that are otherwise impossible, then vanish as if they were never built. Attempts to replicate them result in near disasters or incomprehensible failures. Knowledge itself behaves as though alive, appearing, disappearing, waiting for the right moment in history when humanity can grasp it. It is a rhythm of creation, concealment, and revelation orchestrated by the century, impossible to predict but undeniable when glimpsed in retrospect. Cultural and intellectual developments evolve with uncanny synchronicity. Philosophies, artistic movements, and literary schools appear independently yet mirror one another across continents. Music anticipates instruments not yet invented. Literature depicts political revolutions and technological advances before the material conditions exist. And visual art anticipates landscapes, machinery, and societies that will not exist for decades. Creators report inspiration from visions, dreams, and fleeting impressions of events far beyond their comprehension. The century itself plants seeds of innovation and creativity, distributing them according to rules invisible to any observer. Social and political systems continue to behave in patterns that defy explanation. Governments collapse, reform, or stabilize with timing that appears deliberate. Wars erupt and resolve with sequences that only make sense in hindsight. Leaders act with intuition, seemingly guided by forces beyond human understanding, producing outcomes that align with broader historical patterns invisible to contemporaries. Revolutions, reforms, and migrations occur in alignment with technological or natural anomalies, creating coherence that is only visible when the entire century is analyzed as a whole. Humanity becomes simultaneously autonomous and orchestrated, actors and instruments in a drama written by the century itself. Nature participates in this orchestration with increasing clarity. Climate anomalies, floods, droughts, heat waves, and sudden storms follow patterns inexplicable by meteorology. Crops fail or flourish in ways that defy agricultural science. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in coordination with human events, as though ecosystems are synchronized with social and technological developments. Mountains, rivers, forests, and coastlines bear subtle traces of these patterns, suggesting that the Earth itself is a participant in the century's architecture, recording and reflecting its hidden logic for those perceptive enough to notice. The psychological weight grows unbearable for those immersed in understanding the century. Individuals experience simultaneous awe, terror, and vertigo. Visions, premonitions, and insights into future events challenge linear understanding. Attempting to act on this knowledge alters outcomes unpredictably. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns visible in retrospect. Scholars, historians, and ordinary observers feel like participants and pawns in a living enigma, a system whose logic is beyond perception but whose influence touches every aspect of life, shaping creativity, technology, social structure, and survival. Even beyond the temporal boundary, the century's influence persists. Innovations, cultural movements, and social patterns first glimpsed within it resurface when humanity is ready to understand them. Knowledge lost or suppressed returns precisely at the optimal moment. Movements recur in alignment with the century's subtle logic, and philosophies, art, and scientific insights seeded during this era emerge decades or centuries later. The century is not merely history. It is a continuous, invisible force threading through time, orchestrating human destiny, guiding understanding, and shaping civilization with a precision that cannot be fully perceived, but can be measured in its outcomes. And in this expanding tapestry lies the ultimate realization. The century itself is neither benevolent nor malevolent, neither chaotic nor orderly in the conventional sense. It exists as a living system, orchestrating, observing, and subtly guiding every aspect of human life. Knowledge is selectively distributed. Creativity is timed. Disappearances occur. Natural events unfold with uncanny precision. Humanity participates, both freely and under orchestration, in a narrative whose scope exceeds comprehension. The century is alive in its patterns, a hidden intelligence within the flow of time itself, leaving awe, fear, and wonder in its wake, and an unending question. Can anyone ever truly understand it? As the century reaches its near-final layers, the anomalies intensify in scale and scope. Entire regions report events that mirror one another with a precision that defies logic. Storms erupt simultaneously with revolutions. Scientific breakthroughs coincide with artistic epiphanies, and natural disasters align with the appearance or disappearance of influential figures. Time seems to have become elastic, moments stretch, overlap, and fold back onto themselves. Observers report seeing echoes of past and future events simultaneously, feeling a rhythm underlying reality that cannot be explained but can be sensed. Humanity exists in a feedback loop, simultaneously shaping and being shaped by this hidden temporal architecture. Disappearances evolve into patterns so precise they feel preordained. Scientists, thinkers, and leaders vanish at exact points of critical influence. Entire populations are erased from records, leaving only incomplete data, oral histories, and fragmented artifacts. Witnesses report seeing glimpses of the vanished in dreams, mirrors, or fleeting shadows, suggesting a reality that folds in on itself. Even the most meticulous historians find their work repeatedly contradicted by events that have already happened yet leave no trace. The century operates as both arbiter and curator of history, erasing, revealing, and guiding with intent that humans cannot perceive. Technological phenomena grow increasingly surreal. Devices and systems emerge decades ahead of known science, some functioning fully for days before vanishing, others existing only in sketches, notes, or fragments. Attempts to recreate these inventions often fail spectacularly, yielding results that defy physics or logic. Knowledge itself behaves as though conscious, appearing and disappearing according to an intelligence invisible to human perception. The century seems to orchestrate the flow of discovery, guiding humanity along paths it cannot yet understand, teasing insight that is always just out of reach. Cultural and artistic events continue their inexplicable synchronization. Entire movements in literature, music, and visual arts appear simultaneously across continents, reflecting ideas, aesthetics, and philosophies beyond their time. Artists describe visions of futures, societies, and technologies that do not yet exist. Literary works foreshadow political revolutions, technological innovations, and social upheavals decades in advance. Music anticipates instruments and harmonies not yet realized. Creativity, it seems, is being seeded by the century itself, delivered selectively, orchestrated with invisible precision, and designed to ripple across time. Social and political systems exhibit patterns that confound causality. Governments collapse or stabilize. Revolutions erupt and resolve. Wars ignite and conclude, all with timing that appears deliberate. Leaders act with intuition and foresight that cannot be explained, producing outcomes coherent only when viewed retrospectively. Societies behave as though following a hidden choreography, simultaneously free and constrained, autonomous yet orchestrated. The century's invisible hand moves through the structures of civilization, shaping outcomes with subtlety that escapes direct perception yet leaves undeniable patterns. Natural phenomena continue to mirror human and technological anomalies. Climate shifts, droughts, storms, earthquakes, floods occur with precision that defies meteorology. Crops flourish or fail inexplicably. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in alignment with human events. Geological formations bear subtle markers of these orchestrated patterns. The planet itself participates in the century's architecture, a silent co-creator of the extraordinary narrative unfolding across time. The psychological toll reaches new heights. Individuals immersed in the century experience simultaneous awe, fear, and existential vertigo. Dreams and visions provide glimpses of events yet to occur, but acting on these insights often alters outcomes unpredictably. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns discernible in hindsight. Observers feel simultaneously empowered and constrained, participants and pawns, enmeshed in a living enigma whose rules are beyond comprehension. Beyond the temporal boundaries of the century, its influence continues. Innovations, social movements, and artistic trends first glimpsed during this period resurface decades later, when humanity is ready to understand them. Knowledge lost or suppressed reemerges precisely when needed. Philosophies, inventions, and cultural patterns planted in the century continue to ripple across time, shaping civilization long after the events themselves have passed. The century is not a mere historical period. It is a persistent, hidden force threading through time, orchestrating thought, creativity, and human destiny with precision beyond perception. And in this crescendo, the ultimate truth becomes unavoidable. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is neither random nor entirely deterministic. It exists as a living system, orchestrating, observing, and shaping the trajectory of humanity. Knowledge is distributed selectively. Innovations are timed. Disappearances occur. Natural, social, and technological systems respond to patterns invisible to the human eye. Humanity is caught in a narrative too vast to perceive fully, simultaneously participant and instrument. The century is alive, a hidden intelligence operating through the flow of time, leaving humanity awed, unsettled, and forever questioning the nature of reality. As the century advances toward its hidden apex, the anomalies expand into patterns that defy both logic and imagination. Events begin to overlap across continents and decades with precision that seems preordained. Natural disasters, social revolutions, and technological breakthroughs occur simultaneously, their intersections forming an invisible lattice of causality. Individuals report déjà vu not as isolated moments but as entire sequences of history repeating themselves, each repetition subtly altered. Dreams and visions converge with tangible events, creating the sensation that time itself is a living, observant entity, folding, stretching, and layering reality in ways that defy linear comprehension. Disappearances now reach almost ritualistic inevitability. Scientists, inventors, political leaders, and artists vanish at the exact moment their influence would tip the course of human events. Entire cities, sometimes entire regions, quietly dissolve from official records, leaving behind only cryptic traces. Fragmented artifacts, inconsistent witness accounts, and distorted documentation. Those who remain report fleeting glimpses of the vanished in reflections, shadows, or dreams, giving the unsettling impression that reality itself is watching them, folding in on itself. Humanity becomes both participant and instrument in the century's invisible design, unable to escape its meticulous orchestration. Technological phenomena reach levels bordering on the mythic. Entire systems, machines, and energy devices emerge decades ahead of comprehension, functioning perfectly for brief periods before disappearing entirely. Some leave behind only fragments, sketches, or cryptic instructions. Attempts to replicate these inventions produce results that defy physics or logic, sometimes catastrophically. Knowledge behaves as though alive, appearing, vanishing, and reappearing according to an intelligence that governs the century's rhythm. Humanity follows, stumbles, and learns in accordance with this unseen guidance, a trajectory both precise and unpredictable, impossible to fully map yet undeniable in its effects. Cultural and intellectual patterns intensify in their impossible synchronicity. Entire philosophies, artistic movements, and literary schools appear independently across continents, reflecting identical ideas, aesthetics, and conceptual frameworks. Music anticipates instruments and harmonics not yet invented. Literature depicts social upheavals, technological innovations, and political revolutions before the material conditions exist. Visual art captures landscapes, cities, and machinery centuries ahead of their creation. Artists, writers, and thinkers report inspiration from visions of events and places they have never encountered. Creativity itself is orchestrated by the century, selectively seeded and precisely timed, ensuring its ripple through history is coherent yet imperceptible. Social and political systems act in patterns that confound causality. Governments collapse and stabilize. Wars erupt and conclude. Revolutions flare and fade, all with timing that appears deliberate. Leaders make decisions guided by intuition or foresight they cannot explain. Societies align in coordinated movements, seemingly autonomous yet choreographed by an invisible hand. Entire civilizations move as if following a hidden script that only becomes coherent when the century is viewed as a whole. Humanity is both free and constrained, shaping events while being shaped, actors in a narrative far larger than any one mind can comprehend. Natural phenomena mirror this hidden orchestration. Climate shifts, floods, droughts, storms, and earthquakes occur in patterns impossible to reconcile with conventional science. Crops fail or flourish counterintuitively. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in synchrony with human events. Geological and ecological features bear subtle markers of the century's influence. Earth itself participates in the century's architecture, recording and reflecting its hidden logic for those perceptive enough to notice. Humanity and nature operate as intertwined instruments, guided by patterns invisible yet undeniable. Psychological tension escalates to near collapse for those immersed in the century's events. Observers experience simultaneous awe, terror, and vertigo. Dreams, premonitions, and flashes of insight reveal futures that cannot be rationally understood, and attempts to act on these visions often produce unpredictable consequences. Cause and effect fracture, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns visible in hindsight. Historians, scientists, and ordinary witnesses feel trapped in a living enigma, simultaneously empowered and constrained, participating in a system whose logic exceeds perception, yet whose effects touch every aspect of life. Even beyond the temporal boundaries of the century, its influence endures with unerring precision. Innovations, cultural trends, and social patterns first glimpsed during this period reemerge when humanity is ready to understand them. Lost knowledge resurfaces exactly when needed. Philosophical, artistic, and technological seeds planted in this era continue to grow decades or centuries later, shaping civilization in alignment with the centuries' hidden orchestration. This period is not merely history. It is a persistent, invisible current threading through time, guiding thought, creativity, and human destiny with precision beyond human perception. And in this crescendo, the ultimate revelation emerges. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent, neither chaotic nor deterministic in conventional terms. It exists as a living system, orchestrating, observing, and shaping the flow of human civilization. Knowledge is distributed selectively. Innovation is timed. Disappearances occur. Social, technological, and natural systems respond to hidden patterns. Humanity exists simultaneously as actors and instruments, participants and pawns. The century is alive in its architecture, a hidden intelligence within the flow of time itself, leaving awe, fear, and unending wonder in its wake. At the penultimate stage of the century, the events begin to converge into a rhythm that defies all conventional understanding. Entire continents experience synchronized anomalies. Natural disasters, social upheavals, and technological breakthroughs unfold with eerie precision, intersecting across time and space in ways impossible to chart. Individuals report living entire sequences twice, witnessing outcomes before they occur, and sensing threads of causality that seem alive, almost sentient, guiding human action as if reality itself has become an entity aware of its own narrative. Time is no longer linear. It stretches, folds, and loops in layers that only the most perceptive can even perceive. Disappearances reach a systematic crescendo. Key figures, innovators, leaders, thinkers, and artists vanish at moments critical to human progress. Entire populations or regions quietly fade from historical record, leaving fragmented evidence, distorted testimony, and subtle traces that hint at their former presence. Witnesses occasionally glimpse the missing in reflections, dreams, or fleeting shadows, creating the unnerving impression that reality itself observes and edits history in real time. Humanity becomes both instrument and audience, enmeshed in the century's hidden orchestration, powerless to influence the larger pattern, yet intimately affected by it. Technological phenomena approach near miraculous levels. Machines, energy systems, and communications devices manifest decades ahead of contemporary understanding. Some operate flawlessly for brief spans before vanishing. Others exist only as incomplete sketches or cryptic notes. Replication attempts fail catastrophically or yield outcomes that defy physics and logic. Knowledge itself behaves as though conscious, appearing, vanishing, and returning in perfect alignment with the century's invisible rhythm. Humanity is guided along a trajectory it cannot comprehend, teased by glimpses of insight that always remain just beyond grasp. Cultural and intellectual phenomena intensify in impossible synchrony. Philosophical frameworks, literary movements, and artistic trends emerge simultaneously across continents, sharing ideas, aesthetics, and concepts that seem too advanced for their time. Music anticipates instruments and harmonics not yet invented. Literature describes societies, revolutions, and technologies decades before they can exist. Visual art portrays cities, machines, and landscapes that will only appear in the distant future. Inspiration comes from dreams, visions, or fleeting impressions of unseen events. Creativity itself is curated by the century, delivered selectively and orchestrated to ripple through human history in patterns invisible yet undeniable. Social and political systems behave according to logic that defies understanding. Governments collapse and stabilize, revolutions flare and fade, and wars erupt and resolve in sequences only coherent when analyzed in hindsight. Leaders act with intuition and foresight that cannot be explained, producing outcomes that align with broader patterns invisible to contemporaries. Entire societies move in unison, seemingly autonomous but secretly choreographed. Humanity participates in a hidden architecture, free in appearance, constrained in effect, dancing to rhythms dictated by forces beyond comprehension. Natural phenomena mirror this orchestration with precision. Climate events, droughts, storms, floods, and earthquakes follow patterns inexplicable by conventional science. Crops thrive or fail unpredictably. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in alignment with human events. Geological formations, rivers, and forests bear subtle markers of the century's influence, suggesting that Earth itself is co-authoring the unfolding narrative. Humanity and nature are intertwined instruments, playing in concert with the invisible rhythm of the century, creating patterns perceptible only after time reveals them. Psychological impact reaches its peak. Observers report simultaneous awe, dread, and vertigo. Dreams, premonitions, and flashes of insight reveal futures that cannot be understood rationally. Acting on this information alters outcomes unpredictably, fracturing the familiar sense of cause and effect. Patterns emerge only retrospectively, leaving historians, scientists, and ordinary witnesses trapped in a loop of wonder, fear, and incomprehension. Humanity is caught between perception and reality, between agency and orchestration, participants in a living enigma whose logic exceeds comprehension, but whose influence touches every aspect of life. Even beyond the century's temporal boundaries, its influence persists. Knowledge, innovations, and social patterns planted in this period reappear when humanity is ready to comprehend them. Lost discoveries resurface exactly when needed. Cultural and philosophical movements germinate decades or centuries later in perfect alignment with the century's hidden logic. This era is not merely a period of history. It is a persistent, invisible current threading through time, shaping human destiny, creativity, and understanding with precision that can be observed but never fully explained. And here emerges the ultimate realization. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent, neither chaotic nor deterministic in conventional terms. It exists as a living system, orchestrating, observing, and shaping humanity's trajectory. Knowledge is distributed selectively, innovations are timed, disappearances occur, natural and social systems respond to invisible patterns. Humanity exists simultaneously as actors and instruments, participants and pawns. The century is alive, an intelligence embedded within the flow of history, leaving awe, fear, and profound wonder in its wake, challenging the very notion of reality and the human understanding of time itself. Time itself seems to fracture at the edges of perception. The century pulses like a living organism, stretching, folding, and looping reality in layers that defy comprehension. Entire continents experience events that mirror, echo, and intersect with near-perfect precision. Storms erupt as revolutions ignite, breakthroughs coincide with disasters, and disappearances of key individuals occur in perfect synchronicity with cultural or technological transformations. Humanity witnesses sequences that repeat, diverge, and overlap, moments where the past, present, and future coexist in a single, almost tangible rhythm. Disappearances reach an almost cosmic inevitability. Scientists, inventors, political leaders, and artists vanish at moments that pivot the trajectory of civilization. Entire populations are erased from history, leaving only distorted documents, fragmented artifacts, and whispered testimonies. The vanished appear in fleeting glimpses, reflections, dreams, shadows, as if reality itself observes and edits history in real time. Humanity is no longer merely a witness. It is an instrument, intricately woven into the centuries' invisible orchestration, powerless to resist yet intimately bound to the outcome. Technological anomalies reach near-mythic levels. Entire systems, machines, and energy devices manifest decades ahead of understanding, functioning perfectly before vanishing. Others exist only as incomplete sketches or cryptic instructions. Attempts to recreate them yield outcomes that defy physics, logic, or probability, sometimes catastrophically. Knowledge behaves as if alive, appearing and disappearing according to an intelligence that governs the centuries' hidden rhythm. Humanity follows, stumbles, and adapts to trajectories it cannot perceive, teased by glimpses of insight that remain just beyond comprehension. Cultural and intellectual developments accelerate in impossible synchronicity. Entire artistic, literary, and philosophical movements emerge simultaneously across continents, sharing ideas, aesthetics, and visions that exceed the limits of their time. Music anticipates instruments and harmonics not yet invented. Literature describes revolutions, technological advancements, and societal shifts decades before they materialize. Visual art captures cities, machines, and landscapes centuries ahead of their creation. Inspiration comes from dreams, visions, and fleeting impressions, delivered by the century itself, orchestrating human creativity with invisible precision. Social and political systems unfold with impossible choreography. Governments collapse and stabilize. Revolutions flare and subside. Wars erupt and conclude in sequences only coherent when the century is viewed as a whole. Leaders act with foresight they cannot explain, shaping events that align with the invisible architecture of the century. Societies move in unison, free in appearance yet constrained by patterns beyond perception. Humanity dances along rhythms it cannot fully perceive, guided by a force that transcends logic, morality, and intention. Nature itself mirrors the century's orchestration. Climate anomalies, storms, droughts, floods, and earthquakes unfold in patterns defying meteorology. Crops flourish or fail unpredictably. Animal populations migrate, reproduce, or vanish in synchrony with human events. Geological and ecological formations bear subtle markers of the century's influence. Earth participates actively, entwined with human civilization, a co-author of events both subtle and catastrophic, silently recording the century's hidden logic. Psychological tension reaches an unbearable peak. Individuals report simultaneous awe, dread, and existential vertigo. Dreams, premonitions, and flashes of insight reveal futures that cannot be rationally understood. Attempting to act on them produces unpredictable consequences. Cause and effect shatter, leaving only echoes, coincidences, and patterns perceptible after the fact. Humanity feels both empowered and constrained, caught in a living enigma whose influence touches every aspect of life, consciousness, and society. Beyond temporal boundaries, the century's influence persists. Innovations, knowledge, and cultural trends first glimpsed during this period resurface when humanity is ready to comprehend them. Lost discoveries return precisely when needed. Philosophical, artistic, and technological seeds planted decades earlier germinate in perfect alignment with the century's hidden architecture. The century is not merely history. It is an ongoing, invisible current, threading through time, orchestrating civilization, guiding thought, creativity, and destiny in ways imperceptible yet undeniable. And here, at the apex, the ultimate truth reveals itself. The century is neither benevolent nor malevolent, neither chaotic nor deterministic in conventional terms. It exists as a living system, orchestrating, observing, shaping humanity with precision beyond perception. Knowledge is distributed selectively. Innovation is timed. Disappearances occur. Social, natural, and technological systems respond to patterns invisible to the human eye. Humanity is simultaneously actor and instrument, participant and pawn. The century is alive in its architecture, a hidden intelligence within the flow of history, leaving awe, fear, and unending wonder in its wake. A force too vast, too precise, and too mysterious for comprehension, yet intimately woven into the essence of every human life. And so, as the century finally recedes into history, humanity is left not with clear answers, but with an enduring sense of awe, uncertainty, and subtle terror. Every anomaly, every disappearance, every inexplicable event becomes a thread in a tapestry far larger than comprehension, a rhythm that we cannot master, yet one that shapes every heartbeat, every decision, every culture, and every thought. The century reminds us that time itself is not linear but alive, folding, looping, and echoing through human civilization in ways we barely perceive. Knowledge, innovation, art, and society were never truly ours to command. They were gifts, challenges, and orchestrations placed along a path we could only follow imperfectly. We carry its legacy in the way we create, in the way we dream, in the faint intuition of patterns just beyond our grasp. Humanity is left with the haunting realization that the past is not fixed, the present is fleeting, and the future is threaded with invisible designs that cannot be fully seen, only sensed. The vanished, the forgotten, the inexplicable, all are markers of a force operating beyond morality, beyond intention, beyond human understanding. The century teaches that existence itself is participation in something far greater, a living intelligence threading through life, silently shaping our destinies, whispering truths we are not ready to hear. Yet, despite the terror and uncertainty, there is a strange beauty in this realization. Humanity is not merely a spectator but a participant in a narrative that is older, wider, and infinitely more intricate than we can imagine. Each life, each action, each moment is a note in the symphony of a century whose design we cannot decode, yet whose echoes we feel in our hearts, our creativity, and our memories. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Some mysteries are never meant to be solved, only lived through, honored, and remembered. The century passes, yet it endures, alive, invisible, omnipresent. A reminder that human history is not only what we see, what we document, or what we understand, but also what we sense, what we carry forward, and what quietly shapes the very essence of who we are.